And with that, let's get started. Hi there. My name is Chris Lemma. I'm a VP of products here at Nexus. And today we're talking about your options for this situation, which is the Magento 1 end of life. If you don't know what that is, then you're in a perfect spot because we're going to talk about it. If you know what that is and you're wondering, what do I do? You're in a perfect spot because we're going to talk about it. And if you have a couple ideas and you have a couple questions, then you're in the perfect spot because we're going to talk about it. What we're really doing here is talking about options that don't require you to spend mass amounts of money and don't require you to go crazy. So let's get into it. And before we get started, I want to make you a couple promises. The first thing to note is we're going to have a discussion about your options and about the challenges and what all this means, and it will likely drive questions. There is a component in the GoToWebinar control panel where you can go and ask those questions. I want you to know that I'll stay on with you and we'll talk through every one of those questions till we get to the end. So you don't have to worry. We are going to make sure we get to all of those. The other thing is this is not a sales pitch. So I'm not in sales, and even if I were in sales, right? The goal of this presentation is to give you some options, talk through them, and help you understand the context that you're in. It is not to pitch you on something. So even as I end and tell you about some of the options you have going forward, there's no special pitch at the end. There's no heavy discount at the end. This is a pitch-free zone. The third thing you should know, and I mentioned it right before we got started, is we are recording this presentation. So if you get pulled away, if you have to step away and you're like, whoa, that was the exact moment when I was about to hear my question answered, just know that it's being recorded and we'll get it out to you later this week so that you can watch the whole thing whenever it makes sense for you. I'm going to make you one more promise, and that is that even though we're talking about things that can elevate stress, I don't want you to be stressed at all. Even though we're talking about situations that are serious, I don't want you to be stressed. No matter where you are, no matter what situation you find yourself in, there are some options. You have options, and they're not all ridiculous and crazy, and we're going to be able to get through this. So with that, let's talk about what end of life is not. Right? Because there's a lot of question about what is this end of life. I want to be clear, right? Because some things are not end of life. When Apple says courage, that's not end of life, right? All products at some point, and especially digital products, get to a point where they may not be viable, right? Now, I'm not saying that specific to this Magento 1 software, but software, when it's written, assumes certain context. It's going to run on an operating system, but that operating system is going to change over time. And so 10 years and 15 years later, the software and the assumptions that were baked into it may not play well with your upgraded operating system. Or other software, unrelated again to Magento, interacts with devices, and those devices may change or the software may change, and those two things don't work anymore. Over time, there is natural failure. That's not end of life. Product obsolescence is also not end of life, right? Where you change, I can't tell you the number of USB cables I have in my house, right? I have a USB cable that has a tiny little thing. They call that now micro USB. They have mini USB, they have USB-A, they have USB-C, and every one of those cables is different. And at some point, someone decided, ooh, we should change the cable. I don't know if they did it because they just wanted to sell more stuff, but that's normally what happens, right? Every time someone changes the dongle or the connection to headphones or phones or anything else, I got to go buy more cables, right? But that's product obsolescence. That's not end of life. And then, of course, there's product innovation, right? When things evolve, because technology can improve it, you're going to have changes. And those changes are going to mean that other products are no longer applicable. And that is also not end of life. So there are a whole bunch of situations where we get to this place where we say the thing that used to work maybe doesn't work so well anymore, or it's changing. Those are not end of life. End of life is a specific dynamic, and it is a normal part of a product life cycle, right? You get to a point where someone says, hey, listen, given the cost of supporting this particular product as everything else around it has changed, it's going to get to a point where we say, we're not going to sell this product anymore. We're not going to support this product anymore. And I have gone through several end-of-life situations. In my early career, Windows was the main product where we saw this experience. The first main operating system that I played with forever was a product called Windows NT. And Windows NT ran and ran and ran and ran, and then suddenly they said, no, we want you to move to another product. And it was Windows 2000 Server. And all of a sudden, they started giving us dates where they said, by this date, we're gonna stop selling this product, and by this other date, we're gonna stop supporting it. Like, it's time for you to move on. And you go, okay. Every time you get to an end of life situation, the biggest signal is it's time to make a change. Now, it can be frustrating if you feel like, but my stuff is still working. My stuff is just fine. And on the surface, it may be working. On the surface, it may look like everything's okay. But it is very hard for non-technical people, and I'm not suggesting anything about your technical prowess, but it's hard to look at the top, right? And you see that cute little duck in the water, and it looks calm, and underneath the water, right? Crazy legs paddling. It's hard for us to see above the waterline and know what's happening below the waterline. And when you're not super technical, it's hard to see something functioning and working and not realize that actually underneath the surface, the technology is changing, has changed. And because of that, you get in a situation where you're saying, there's going to be a greater amount of vulnerabilities, or there's going to be some challenges here. Or what happened with Windows NT specifically was it just said, hey, in order to do the things we want to do, we would have to re-architect the whole product. And in fact, that's what we did, and we called it Windows 2000. In the case of Magento 1, Magento 1 and Magento 2 share something in common, and that's the word Magento. But there's a whole bunch else that is different. It is different. People will talk about Magento 1 to Magento 2, and sometimes think, if you're not a technical person, you might think, oh, go ahead and just upgrade me this weekend. This isn't a simple upgrade. This is a completely different platform. And so you have one thing that's working well enough, but if you were to try and say, okay, make this change and support this and tweak this and make this, and all of a sudden you get to the point where you're going, there's too much to change. Magento 2 is a whole refresh. And because it is a different architecture, because it's designed differently, you will have to migrate platforms. And so when Magento said, hey, this is the date, it's a signal. An end of life event is a signal that says, this is one of those times where you have to make a change, and you need to think about making that change. But of course, in the midst of all of this, you may have heard 4 of these lies, right? These 4 lies says, hey, they've made an announcement that says end of life is this June. So what happens on July 1st? And someone will say, well, if you're running on Magento 1, it's game over. Your store will stop working. Or, hey, if you don't upgrade to Magento 2 before July, and I've seen some recent bulletins that state something very similar to this, you won't be able to collect payments online. And you go, oh my goodness, that's just as bad as the first one. Or you say, hey, everybody has moved to Magento 2, right? So you're not going to find anyone to help you with your Magento 1 code base. It's like game over for you. Or, hey, there's no way. Like, we've looked at it. You start hearing merchants who have made a switch to a different platform, and they go, we talk to everybody, and the cost of a move to Magento 2 is $150,000, $200,000. There's no way you're going to do it without spending a fortune. So what I want to do is take a couple minutes and talk to you a little about these statements, right? The first thing you should know is that your Magento 1 code will still work on July 1st, on August 1st, and even on September 1st. There is no special line in the code that says, hey, on July 1st, explode this thing, right? This is not there's no self-destruct, there's no component that says this is game over for you. The code is still gonna work. And when someone shows up and clicks the buy button on July 1st, it's still gonna go through. But You need to understand that it's your requirement, it is your responsibility to make sure that the software stays up to date so that you don't have a security issue. And that means patching. And that, of course, is what Adobe and Magento has stated, that come July, right, there's no more patches for Magento 1. So that's why some people will say, oh, it's game over, right? Because if they're not giving you patches, it's game over. And you go, no, those are two different statements. They're not giving us patches. That's a challenge, but it doesn't mean your code explodes. It doesn't mean that it's game over right then. It just means you need to solve a patch problem. We'll talk about that in a second. All right, you can be PCI compliant. I know that there's folks talking about, oh, you can't be PCI compliant. There is, again, and I can't tell you the number of banks, payment gateways, merchants, even Trustwave, right, that we have been interacting with and talking to over the last several months to say, hey, I have one core question, and that is, on July 1st, if someone's running Magento 1, does it automatically create a failure on a scan, right? In order to be PCI compliant, your software has to run a scan. You have to run a scan regularly to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities there, right? Keep you safe. Is there something that you would stipulate that on this date, if this code base is Magento 1, that it's game over for you, that you're just pulling the plug? We've talked to all sorts of folks, right? Whether it's Stripe or Authorize.net, whether it's Amex, whether it's Evo, whether it's Trustwave, anyone, right? And Trustwave's not a payment gateway. They're the folks that do the scans. And nobody has said, hey, on this date with this code base, we just kill it. What everyone has said is, listen, the requirement for PCI compliance is that your code be regularly scanned and regularly be fine. And if there is a issue that is found, it must be patched. And since Adobe and Magento are not going to patch it anymore, we strongly recommend that you make a move. And you go, yes. However, this is, roughly speaking, the same dynamic as if I was running my own custom code. If I had written my own custom cart, I would still have to go through scans. I would still have to be demonstrated PCI compliant. And if they found something, I would have to fix it. That's the nature of the beast. But it doesn't mean that because you suddenly find that it's Magento 1 that you're going to say, no, you're no longer PCI compliant. What it says is, hey, after you're not getting patches from them, you know you're going to have to get some patches. You know you're going to have to keep it secure. But you're not automatically dead in the water. And that's a huge distinction, because we're going to talk to you about some of those patches in a minute. But let's keep going with these lies, right? Guess what? There are still agencies that have certified developers, and they're still doing projects on Magento 1. We know because we've been talking to them. For the last several months, our partnership team has been talking to agencies and pulling together lists of folks where we say, hey, are you still working on a Magento 1 to Magento 2 migration? Is that something you still do? Or are you still working on Magento 1? Will you, help someone if they need a feature, they need something in Magento 1? And we hear over and over, sure, of course we can do that. We have some folks that could do that, right? And of course, if you decide, hey, I do want to figure out how to move to Magento 2, even if I may not be able to get there by July 1, are there folks that can look at my code base in Magento 1 and figure out how to get me to Magento 2, even if I have custom code? And the answer is yes, of course. We know several agencies who can help you get there. And they're still top-notch folks who know the Magento 1 code base, who can help you. So you don't have to worry that, oh, they all just disappeared, right? One of the last dynamics we hear a lot is, oh, it's going to cost you 150 to 200,000. And there's no question, a couple of years ago when this was first starting and people were starting to call agencies, yes, a lot of folks would give you a quote that was 150 to 200,000. What they were quoting you often, and it might have even been more than that, right? 400,000. What they were quoting you was to take every custom feature that you built the first time around and port it all, change it all to be Magento 2 compliant, as well as customizing a theme and making sure that you have a complete store Magento 2 and re-architecting several things. It's going to cost you a lot of money and take a lot of time. Of course, that makes sense. But when you're talking to folks now, when you're talking to some of these agencies now, and you're saying, I just need to get my store from. I want to get my store from Magento 1 to Magento 2. And I don't need every customization I ever did. And I don't need a perfectly customized theme, but I need to get moved over because I don't want to have to worry about this any longer. The good news is there are several companies that have, whether you want to call it a quick start or a fast track, they have a lot of different names for we can get you over. And they'll get you over for way less than this, right? We've seen prices at $50,000, which is 1/3 of the price of 150, and I just did that math in my head. Not only that, but there are even some folks who, some of them are financing the process, right? So that you have a low monthly payment instead of all in one shot. Suffice to say, I can guarantee you that you can afford the change. If that's what you want, if you say, I want to go to Magento 2, we can connect you up with partners who can make it affordable and help you get there. So we've talked about what does Magento's end of life mean, but what we haven't talked about is what does it mean for you? Let's walk through some of that, right? The thing you've heard me say already, the thing that's most critical is that end of life means Magento won't deliver any further patches for M1. On July 1, if there's a threat to the code base of Magento 1, nobody's going to come out, right, from the Magento organization, from Adobe, and say, oh, you know what, we were joking, here's a patch. They're not doing that, right? And that's a truth, and we all have to be clear on that truth. That's not the only truth, but we have to recognize, okay, that is the reality of the situation. So as a result of that, you're going to need to find different sources for your M1 patches. That's when we were talking about those PCI compliance scans before, right? The whole point is if there's a scan that comes through and catches something, you need to be able to say, okay, all right, I got to go get a patch. Let's go get the patch. And that means you have to know where to look for those patches. And you got to know someone who's committed to creating those patches. You also, because of an end of life situation, have to decide, is going to, Magento 2 what you want to do? Is it the right thing for you? And if so, you got to put a plan together because it's not going to happen magically. There is no toggle, there is no button, there's no quick wizard to go through and then go, oh, look, I'm on Magento 2. That's the hard part about the fact that it's Magento 1, Magento 2. Most of the time, when you're using a software product and they just take you to the next, you look at the next number and the number after that in the next release, you just think, okay, just click a button, do the whatever, run the patch, do the thing, and we'll just upgrade. This is not that. The shift from Magento 1 to Magento 2 is going to take some time. It's going to take some work. It's not automatic. And so because of that, right, if you decide I want to go to Magento 2, then you need to find yourself an agency and create a plan together and then start executing. And of course, like I said, we have a bunch of agencies we can recommend to you. Now, end of life also means there's a good chance you should consider some other options, right? Now, I'm not against Magento 2. I think Magento 2 may work perfectly for you. But anytime you're going to make an investment to re-platform, which is what this is, right? You're going to go from Magento 1 to Magento 2. You're going to spend time, money. You're going to hire someone. They're going to create a plan. You're going to execute on the plan. All of that is work. And if you're going to do that work, you ought to step back for a second, take a breath, and evaluate your other options. And we're seeing merchants do this every day. They're saying, hold on, if I'm going to make a switch, this would probably be the best time to look around and see what switch should I make, right? I worked with a Magento merchant just a couple months ago, right? He was sitting in his cigar shop, a cigar lounge, the third largest lounge in the country. And he's sitting in his lounge and a guy walks in who is going door to door in this strip mall and telling them, right, hey, I can get you hooked up on Shopify, right? Now, I have never heard of this before, right? I didn't know people were going door to door selling Shopify, which is an online hosted platform. You'd think they just sell it online. I don't know what this guy's deal was. I don't know what made him do it, but it's also hilarious. He walked into a cigar lounge, right? And if you know anything about selling tobacco online, you know you need a custom relationship, a dedicated relationship with something like authorize.net to be able to do that, to take in money for tobacco. And if you're doing that, then you know that Shopify is going to charge you additional fees because you're not using Shopify payments. So none of this was a good idea for this guy or for the merchant. But the merchant calls me up and says, hey, I got this guy who just came in and left and was telling me to move to Shopify. I'm on Magento 1. We're already starting to talk with our team here about where we go next. Of course, you're going to look at options. Now, I'm not saying Shopify is your best option, but I am saying there are options, and you're going to look at Shopify and BigCommerce and everything else. We'll talk about that in a minute too. But suffice to say, end of life is an opportunity for you to look at all the options out there. And of course, end of life means that even as you're evaluating all those options, even as you're considering and testing and talking to people, even as you're in the middle of a migration to whatever platform you're doing, you need to keep your M1 store safe. You need to keep it protected because, again, bad actors could show up in July and August, September, and you want to make sure your store is okay. So I promised you that in this webinar, we would talk about your options. We've talked about what is end of life. We've talked about what it means for you. Now let's talk a little about what are some of the options you have. The first is if you're running a great store, it's generating great revenue, you have the high traffic coming in, you got a good amount of customizations in play, and you know you want to move to Magento 2. The first time around, as you started talking to people, the quotes were really high. You were like, well, let's see if Magento and Adobe push the deadline again. And even a couple months ago, we saw this kind of rallying cry to move it again, and people wondered, is it going to move? Well, here's the deal, right? It's not moving. So you get to this point where you realize, all right, I have a high traffic, high volume, good revenue, some decent customizations, and I want to move to Magento 2. I know I want to do that. Here's my problem. My Magento 1 agency or developer left a while ago. We've mostly just been keeping it going without messing with it too much, and it still seems to work, but I don't have a partner and I need to find one. Well, yes, we have some options for you. We have some recommendations we can make, or you can go out and Google it, right? But either way, there are agencies that can help you with that, and that is a legit option. It is the main option when people talk about Magento and going, like, how do you deal with this end of life situation? Almost everybody goes, you just got to go to M2, right? And you back up a little and you go, well, there are other options, right? And that's the second option, right? That's the, hey, I want to look at other options. And if you have a code base that you haven't really spent any time on, looked at your store in a while, you haven't updated it, you're not on even the latest version of Magento 1, right? You're maybe a couple years out and you're going, oh man, it's going to take work to do a lot of this stuff. Maybe you're thinking, I do like the idea of moving to something a little simpler, a little cleaner, but my concern is cost. I don't know what it'll take to move, and I really don't know what are all the hidden costs of moving to these platforms. Everybody paints you the rosy picture. What's the real deal? And lastly, your third option is, hey, I don't know enough about this stuff. I don't know enough about my store. I don't know enough about the technology. I don't know enough about the options. What I want to do is just hold steady and get someone else to do all the evaluation. Well, all of those are options. So if you want to move to Magento 2, right, the most important thing you should know, and I hinted at it earlier, is that today there are quick start and fast track programs that will say, okay, look, we can take your entire catalog. We can take all the data out of your existing M1 and we can port that catalog to M2. We can get all your products over, and that's products and product variations and any custom attributes or custom fields tied to those products. We can get your catalog over. We can get your orders and customers, and maybe you don't want to bring 10 years or 20 years worth of, well, it wouldn't be 20, but you want to bring 5, 10, 15 years of customer data from your M1 store. You may not want to bring it all over to your new store, right? You may want to say, well, hey, take the folks that have actually made a purchase in the last 3 years, let's bring that up, or the last 1 year. You can take and export all the rest, save it in Excel files or something, but you go, these people are customers that we expect we may hear from again, or we want to bring back to the store. So they will take, either a subset or all of your customers and orders, and they'll move them over. And then they'll get you a baseline Magento 2 theme and go, okay, here it is. Now that's not the same as your theme, right? You may have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars customizing your own experience and design, and they're not offering that in this fixed price approach. But the benefit of a fixed price approach is that for $50,000, right, you might be able to say, okay, let's just get it all over, get my customers, get my orders, get my products all brought over, get Magento 2 configured, right? That's another big deal, because you're not going to know every tab and switch. They'll get over and configure it on really great hosting, right? And I hope they bring it over to us, right? But that's just me personally. But you can get Magento 2 on something like Nexus with a quick start or a fast track program, and they can do it in less than 2 months. And you go, that would be amazing, right? If the last time, if 18 months ago you talked to someone and they said it'll be 5 to 6 months and 200,000, and now I'm telling you less than 2 months and 50,000, that's a pretty big difference, right? Now again, it's not going to bring over every one of your customized modules, every one of your customized, the UI and the theme, right? It's a fast track or quick start. It'll get you there. Now, they will still offer you additional services, right? But for that fixed fee, you can make it over, and that's great news. And if that's interesting to you, right, I'll show you at the end how you can interact with us, right? We're not selling you anything, but we can get you some names. We can get you some agencies that will help you with that, right? So this is one of your options, and it's a great option. And in fact, I know of at least one of these agencies that will, as I mentioned before, finance it, so that you're not even pushing 50 grand across the table up front, right? You make a different kind of commitment, a longer term commitment, you pay monthly fees, but it also comes with, support and everything else going forward. So there's a lot of interesting options out there. The point is, this is something that is feasible. Now, I told you this is a great time to look at other options, other platforms. And so, of course, one of the things I want to bring up is WooCommerce, which is another open source platform, much like Magento. If you chose Magento, right, and I would imagine you chose Magento, especially if you're on one several years ago. At the time, you might have heard of WooCommerce, but thought, no, this is only for tiny little stores, and it's not nearly the kind of grade A that Magento is. And that's true. Back then it was, and even today, WooCommerce has less stores running multiple millions than a year than Magento. It's true, that's what it is. But if you talk about the total number of stores, there are way more WooCommerce stores out there than Magento. The open source dynamic of it really took off, and there are tons and tons of WooCommerce stores out there. And if you want to talk about stores that are 5 million a year and more, we host more of them here at Nexus than anywhere else. We designed and developed a managed WooCommerce hosting platform specifically for high performance stores. Doesn't mean we don't have thousands of other stores that are smaller, but we have more high performance and high revenue generating stores than anyone else, because we understand what it's like to run another open source e-commerce platform like Magento and to tune for high performance, right? Of course, there are others, right? Maybe you've heard of BigCommerce, and BigCommerce is it's a hosted platform. So you don't put it on your own servers, you host it somewhere and they host it on their platform. It's another option that you may want to consider. The benefits of that platform is you can hire an agency to design any UI you want, right? They are a solid player, a leader in API-based, headless-based e-commerce. And what that means is their SaaS has all the configuration of how the store works, but you can hire an agency to design the user experience any way you want, and then use an API to connect the dots between a front end and BigCommerce as the back end. Now, Suffice to say, as you can imagine, those APIs are available on their enterprise plan. So you're not going to get this for $79 a month. But those enterprise plans do provide a really rich API, and people have built all sorts of serious stores on top of BigCommerce. So you may want to look at that. I don't even have to ask you if you've heard of Shopify. If you Google e-commerce, Google will say, did you mean Shopify? So there is almost nothing more synonymous with e-commerce than Shopify out there. It is another hosted platform, and it is very popular. My only caution to you, and maybe you already know this, right? If you talk to people who are on Shopify, the question you ought to ask is, well, okay, so what plan are you on and how much are you paying? The average person who's on the $29 a month plan is paying $89 a month. And you go, didn't you just say $29 plan? Yes, they're on the $29 plan, but by the time you start adding features, you're up to $89, including backups, right? You don't get backups with BigCommerce or with Shopify. It's a platform, but then when you like, no, I want a backup of all my data, you're like, well, that'll be $9 a month and I got to pay for someone else, right? They have marketplaces rich with these apps, and you add these apps. It's not really an app, it's a feature. And so you pay per month for features you want. We just did a comparison for a customer moving from Magento 1, and they looked at Shopify and WooCommerce. The cost of the extensions on WooCommerce was something around $2,000. The cost of those extensions on Shopify was about $7,000 a year, right? And you go, wow, okay, it is a platform that is very popular, but one of the reasons it's popular is because you come in really at the low end, and then you don't realize that, you know, with each thing you add, the prices go up. So what I tell people is get some technical help. Get someone who can dig in and really look at your store and look at what features you're going to need to turn on so that you understand the true cost of running on that platform. Now, the other option, right? So we talked about Magento 2, and then we talked about exploring platforms. But the third option, right, was hold tight for a second and get someone else to help you. Get someone to evaluate things for you. And in the midst of that, because you know that's going to take time, we designed the Nexus Safe Harbor. Now, I have told you, right, several times through this presentation, right, you're going to need your own patches, right? If you get to July 1 and Adobe and Magento have said, we're not going to patch this anymore, I've said you need to find another source. That's what we did when we created Nexus Safe Harbor. We said, let's build an additional level of security for Magento 1 stores. And we can regularly check for malware. We can regularly check for bad bots. We can look at the network as a whole and make sure that the stores are protected. But let's also add a staging environment where people can test and make little updates to their own code base, moving up to a different version of PHP, moving up to a different version of the Magento 1 code base. Let's give them a place where they can test things out. But most importantly, let's give them a place where they can test out the patches that we deliver, because our commitment, and it's not a commitment forever, right? We're not saying stay on M1 forever. But if you want to stay on M1 through 2020 and even through 2021, we want to create an environment, a safe harbor, where you can adequately know that while you're evaluating other options, or while you're making migration to M2 or to WooCommerce or anything else, that you have a place where your M1 store can safely live and get patched. That's why we built Nexus Safe Harbor, right? So that we could say, yeah, here's a patch, right? You may have heard about this issue, here's a patch. You want us to install it, we'll install it. You want to install it, download it and install it, test it out in your staging environment, you can do that. We designed Safe Harbor to give you the option and give you the time to explore your options. Now, I've told you about things you can do. Let's talk for a second about things you shouldn't do. Don't freeze and do nothing, right? This isn't the time for you to go, oh, this is overwhelming. I don't have anything I can do. I don't know what to do. Don't do that, right? Because if you're hoping that the deadline is going to get pushed back, it's not going to get pushed back. The other thing is, don't freak out, right? I explicitly walked you through some of the lies you're going to hear, because we know there are people out there talking about it. And we know that they're sharing, whether it is simply sharing information they think is accurate but is not, or whether they're sharing a simplified version of a truth that is oversimplified and therefore is not accurate, or whether it's malicious, right? They have a desire to get you somewhere, and so they're going to scare you to get out of something else. Whatever it is, don't let it freak you out, right? But also, don't rush things, right? There is no reason to say, oh my gosh, I got to get all this done right away. We created Nexus Safe Harbor so that you could take your time. And of course, the last one that I don't think you should do is do this alone. I have mentioned over and over that we have assembled partners, that we have pulled together people, because we don't want you to go it alone, right? And even if it's not us doing it, and that's why I can say there's not a pitch zone, because I don't make any benefit from you choosing one of these partners. What I get is the knowledge that you are working with a trusted partner, that you're working with someone who's not going to scare you, freak you out, who's not going to rush things, but who can help you navigate your next steps. So I wanted to wrap this up right before we get into questions. I wanted to wrap this up by really digging into this quick cheat sheet, right? An easy way for you to figure out what's next. And it's based on the kind of store you have. It's based on what you're interested in doing, and it's based on the things that you worry about. What you'll notice is, depending on what you're trying to do, there is an option for you. And that's what I promised you at the very beginning, that no matter what situation you find yourself in, there is an answer. If you are a high traffic store, you're great and growing, you have good revenue, and you're interested in Magento 2, ping us, right? And we will give you a referral, and you can work with an agency to move you to Magento 2. If you have medium traffic, pretty good revenue, you have some custom code, but you're concerned about the timeline and you want to speed up how you get somewhere else, we would recommend taking a look at WooCommerce. We know, again, agencies that could help you with that, but we know that you could potentially make that move and see both savings and speed and performance as you get there. If you have a low traffic store and it's not growing, you have okay revenue, you don't have a lot of budget for this, and that 50,000 number I put out there, you're like, no, I want to do something for a lot less than that. Well, again, we would tell you, we've seen several stores make the move to WooCommerce at a lower price point. Or what if you have a seriously customized store? You don't know which platform is right given what you do. Maybe you're not selling t-shirts, maybe you're selling subscriptions, or maybe you have a single product and a lot of it is sign up and the onboarding flow, and you just want some advice. Well, by all means, we would love to hear from you and be able to give you an agency that can help you with that, help you explore your options. The first 3 columns are 3 different things you could do depending on the kind of store that you're running, depending on where you're at. But you'll notice there's a 4th column. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not in pitch mode. I don't make a commission out of any of this. I just want to tell you that it doesn't matter where you are. In the product team, we designed, and working with our engineering, our DevOps, our hosting folks, our sales, our marketing folks, all together to create the Nexus Safe Harbor so that whatever choice that you pick, you also have that security of knowing that you don't have to rush it, that you can take your time as you navigate through any of these options, because Nexus Safe Harbor will protect your Magento 1 store. So now, some 40 minutes after I got started talking at you, I want to leave you with 3 options, right? 3 options of how you can get more information. This is about you getting information. There's no buy button here, right? This is just saying, hey, listen, if you want more information on the Nexus Safe Harbor, then you're going to want to check out this URL. And you can see it under Get Safe Harbor Info. You can see the URL there for you. I know it's a little small, but it's explore.nexus.net, Magento EOL Safe Harbor webinar, right? If you go there, there is a form you can fill out to get you more information about our Nexus Safe Harbor. If you're saying, no, I already know, given what I heard from you today, Chris, I want to move to Magento 2 and I want to partner from you. I want to be told, here are a couple names, give me 2 names, and I want to get on my way to one of those quick start or fast track programs. I love the budget, I love the timeline, I love everything about it. Let's do this. Then you want to go to a different landing page, right, where you can give us different information. We'll get you connected to those partners, and you'll be on your way. And of course, right, given that we have the world's only managed WooCommerce hosting platform, given that we have the most number of WooCommerce high performance stores out there, you may have said, well, you know what, I hadn't looked at WooCommerce in a long time, didn't realize that was a serious option, and I'd like to know more. Again, we're not selling you anything. You don't have to buy anything. But if you want to learn more about the options, then you're going to want to go to that URL. So 3 different options for you based on where you are, where your store is sitting at. In either case, or in all of those cases, what you should know is we are a trusted resource for you. We are your partner. And no matter where you find yourself in this mix, as you're navigating the next steps for Magento's end of life situation, we want to be there for you. And we've created a lot of different options, and we've pulled together a whole bunch of different partners so that we can say, yes, let's go do this together. Because the last thing you want to do is do this alone. Thank you. My name is Chris Lemma. Again, I'm the VP of Products over here at Nexus. And what we're going to do now is open it up for questions. But before I open it up for questions, what I'd like to do is get a quick poll. So we're going to pop up a poll on the screen. It's the only thing you're going to see. We'll come back to this screen in case you haven't gotten these URLs. But this poll, right, is a, hey, where are you at, right? I don't love to do this up front, right? I wanted you to hear all the information, but now at the end of this, I'd love to know, where are you at? So you got a lot of different options there. Click on one of those. I'm going to give you a few minutes. This is just where you're at today. It's not a commitment of anything. Again, you're not buying anything. Just want to make sure that you can tell us, right, based on your experience today and where you're sitting and where you're thinking about your store. Tell us a little about what's going on there. Now, while you do that, and while you, we're going to keep that up for a second here. If you have questions, we're going to shift into Q&A. Go into the go to webinar area, and you can put any questions you have there. And like I said, at the beginning of this webinar, we'll sit here and we'll just walk through all of them. All right, we can close down that poll. And what I'm going to do now, right, is go over to the questions. If you have had any questions, by all means, put them there, and we will we'll dig into those and answer any questions. Here's the good news: if you don't have a question right now, and I hope your mind's not reeling, but if you're spinning through all the different options of what you got to do, this isn't the last time you can ask a question. There are a lot of places on the Nexus website at nexus.net where you can come in and contact us. We have also chat windows that you can pop up, and you can ask those questions. If they're product related, if they're related to end of life, if they're related to Nexus Safe Harbor, put them in there. They'll get directed to whoever needs to answer it. It'll be our team, or it'll be someone in our partnership team or sales team, but we will make sure that we get someone to answer that question for you. So I'm going to take a look over here now and see if we've got questions to answer. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, at the top of the hour here, this has been recorded. So we will take this and wrap it up and then ship it out to you so that you have access to this later as well. I want to thank you so much for your time. Now I'm going to take a look and see. It looks like I don't have any questions. So that could either be a really good thing or let's just go with a really good thing, right? Hopefully you're doing well. I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much and take care.